So I'll be very brief because my goal here is just to wrap up the working groups and first acknowledge the work of so many people who worked in several of them and describe or list the products so that you can access them. They're all on the web, hopefully indexed very well so you can access them easily. So again, what we had working groups on was in several of the processes that I tried to illustrate here in this figure, which is how to ingest the data, how to get the metadata correct, how to engage the repositories, how to even select the repositories in the beginning that would be part of DataMed in the same spirit as not every journal is indexed in PubMed, not every repository is indexed in DataMed. There needs to be some criteria. And there were other groups focused on the user interface and use cases and so on. So I'll go very briefly around the circle here in which, use cases are very important. They drove a lot of our selection of repositories. The criteria for inclusion of these repositories took into account what the community had said in those use cases. There was also a working group on identifiers that was important related to the items that Jeff talked about earlier today. Of course, the DATS specification critical to the whole process. Accessibility metadata, something that early on we knew was important because not everything is public, and because it's not public, it doesn't mean it's not shareable. It's not fair. It might be very fair. It's just not public. We also had metadata harvested pilots, so those were among the first ones, and the development of an API that was solicited by the community, and we responded with the creation of one that you saw described earlier today. The graphical user interface is what people see, and that's what they judge us for. Yeah, DataMed is good, DataMed is not good, just because of the interface. It doesn't matter what we did behind the scenes and so on. So that had to be very slick. Results ranking, as I mentioned before, very, very important. We do get the data sets, but do we get the most relevant ones for that search at the top? That's a very critical question. Data citation, as we mentioned before, links to publications, and the evaluation of the whole product. So essentially those working groups are numbered. I happen to chair the number 1 working group, interactions with the BD2K Center and other programs. And we, in our white paper, our goal was to interact with 2 to 3 centers. And I think we clearly went beyond that goal because we interacted with many more. We interacted with the translational genomics picture and the mobile data to knowledge centers in the Count Everything project. We did projects with the David Hausler Center on breast cancer genomics and the rapid disability by design. We worked with links, not upcoming anymore, but already ongoing, with the visualization and ranking projects, as well as this one that was presented today. With the Cedar Center that I haven't put here, we have been having the calls to integrate efforts, and with emerging the working group on data object registry, which I started with colleagues from UCLA and Stanford, joint meetings with centers, coordinating center. We did that in Cloud Pilot. Cloud Pilot means cloud credits pilot. We were recipients of such credits on commercial clouds, and I think our major contribution to date was to show that they were not prepared for the HIPAA environments we wanted to use them for. And so we still have those credits, which we want to apply them wisely, but we think we are fulfilling the notion that the goal is to test it out and see what needs to be improved or changed and so on. I did present at a training webinar a while ago. So like I said, I think we outdid the goal of interacting with 2 or 3 centers. Also, we had, so Jeff led a group on identifiers. The recommendations were issued early on. They were very general, but they continue with the other work. And they're listed here, so I won't repeat, but there were representatives of several institutions, as you see on the right lower quadrant here. Working group 3 that Susanna shared was essentially about DATS, which in the beginning was called the Metadata Working Group, because we didn't have the acronym yet. As Philip described this morning, both a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach were used in order to come up with a specification that would be sufficient to search across repositories. Again, not at the depth of any one repository would have, but something that permitted an activity that was not done before. So it didn't exist before, that you could search across these repositories. And it went over several revisions, given feedback from users. And also mapping to schema.org was an important achievement for this to operate in different modes, pull and push, as was mentioned. Working Group 4, so these are all members of the executive committee, as you say. We shared the honor and the pain of chairing different working groups. And Hua took care of the use case and testing benchmarks. We had a workshop early on where people contributed, and we modeled many of our efforts after those use cases. The data citation metrics was co-shared by Susanna and Jeff, and it was also related to the citation metrics that we hope to see one day, and to implement the mechanisms in DataMed so that we know about that usage. And we'll talk a little bit about this because it's related to the notion of a data market that currently doesn't exist, or doesn't exist in any functional way, in which data have value. If they're used, they have to be recognized or even paid for, and paid the currency. We can discuss what it is, but there needs to be some value going around, and when data are more valuable, some data sets are more valuable than others for different reasons, and this all needs to be acknowledged. Citation is not the only way to value a data set, but it's one of the ways. So this was started in here. The working group 5 of metrics and goals, qualitative and quantitative metrics, and this is very verbose slide, so I won't read it all. But how do we know that we got what we got? That's an important activity as well. This is the one that I'm very proud of, my acronym here for criteria for repository inclusion, standards, interoperability, and sustainability, and it was right at the right timing for this project here. And our conclusions are very simple, and I like simple things as well. So we came up with these items that, again, are somewhat subjective, but give a hint of what we did to start with the repositories that we did, and how we would think that a system of vetting new repositories would develop. Again, according to the prominence of the resource, sustainability, scope, quality, and access. Working Group 7, access metadata, was kind of budding of the metadata working group, specifically targeting accessibility, and then we dealt with issues of authorization, authentication, and access, again, that are very common to public and semi-public resources. The ranking search results was chaired by Hua and Trevor from UT, and also related to the challenge that we heard the results from today. So ranking is very important. Finding it is one piece of it, but then ranking to put the most relevant at the top is something we need to continue to work on. End user evaluation criteria was chaired by Gina and Todd, and engaging end users to enumerate primary characteristics for data mat evaluation, and doing some user-centered criteria and writing about it. So that has been done. Working group 11, repository contact. George, again, being both a repository director and a member of the executive committee, helped get engagement by others, and there was also a workshop conducted not so long ago about it. Getting there, a dozen of them. Working group 12, standard-driven curation best practices, chaired by Alejandra, Philippe, and Jared. And so they are from Oxford and from Michigan, and assist repositories in creating their DATS metadata. So that's how we envision things being in the future to be scalable, is that each repository would be creating their or mapping their data into DATS format. Deliverables will be a document that provide use cases, offer lessons, and there were workshops conducted, and also one in May, to bring together DAX experts and repository members. 13, because we're not superstitious, is the evaluation and harvesting in NLP pilot projects. This was essentially the challenge that Kirk talked about today. So you heard this. Many groups participated. It was very exciting. In particular, I was with the Army of UC grads, and they were very excited about the results in here. And they said, well, can we count that we won, because after all, this index was better. And I said, I'm conflicted. I can't say anything. Let's just put the table out there and people can make their own conclusions. But it was very exciting to see, young folks going after and figuring out if they could tinker this and do that they would get better results. So pretty exciting, and thanks all for participating. Congratulations for the 2 groups that were deemed the recipients of the subcontract.